Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, or greetings programs, whatever thing I should say. Hello to everybody. Welcome to Moving Fish Facts to the Future. Today's webinar is with Alister Christie from LearnDelphi.tv.
Good. Yes, for me, it's good morning. It's 8 o'clock in the morning here in New Zealand. It's quite a chilly morning, but the sun's just sort of starting to come out. Yes, so this is an interesting video. I was talking with Jim a while back, and sort of we made a brief discussion on the fact the BioLife database, the fish facts, and the images in that were quite dated, and we thought someone should update the database, and I thought I could have a go at doing that. There's probably some free images online that I could take advantage of, and turns out there was an API and for them, and I kind of just went down a rabbit hole from there.
I found out the term for that is called shaving the yak.
Right.
Where you have like, oh, this will be simple, and then like, oh, but if I do that, I got to do this and do this and this and this, and so each step you take takes you further away from accomplishing the goal of updating it. But it ended up being a really interesting video that you made in the process. So
yeah, it was sort of REST and JSON, and getting quite deep into the way T-Graphic works in terms of registering how it automatically determines what kind of image is present in a stream, and possibly can discuss that in a bit more detail after the video. But yeah, it's quite. It got quite involved, and I managed to discover there's some obscure JPEG formats that are not very common, but it happened to be one of these images that I was trying to replace. Was not in Delphi 10.3.3, which is what I originally recorded the video in. There's a bug in the Delphi JPEG code in which it wasn't automatically sensing or detecting this type of JPEG, and so I created a issue on quality.embarcadero.com, and it was indeed fixed for 10.4. So it's good to see.
Always great news. I was joking with somebody the other day that, they're learning software for wanting to learn programming and looking for tips, and I said, you're going to spend more time reading code than you are writing code, and part of being a programmer is being like, I don't know why this isn't working. This should be working, and being frustrated and trying to figure things out. And I said, you'll know. So when you get frustrated, that means you're doing it right. But I said, you'll know you've arrived when you look at the time and it's 6 in the morning and you've just rewritten your memory manager because of a syntax error someplace. And that happens so often to me, that I'll reinvent the wheel only to discover the problem was I had turned the car in the wrong direction. So
yeah, I had a little bit of time the other day, and so I was playing around with DeepStack, which is a image recognition. I think I mentioned to you before. So it recognizes things in images. So you can say, it'll say, this is a person, this is a cow, this is a knife, this is a potted plant. Has a huge list of things that it recognizes, and it has a API. And so I managed to get that working with Delphi, and I spent quite a while banging my head against it, and then make a subtle change and it works, and suddenly you go, ooh, it's like, really it's quite an amazing buzz you get from being frustrated for quite a long time, and then just working out that simple fix, realizing how it needs to work.
Yep. So that's something I like about this was that it does kind of go down that, like, oh, well, this isn't working, let's figure it out, and then fixes it. So even though the bug that you fix in this is ultimately fixed, it's still neat I think to see that process of how you dive in there and how you figure this out, what's going on, and then how you would fix the bug and stuff. So
yeah, and if people are running a version prior to 10.4, they might appreciate the fix being present. In fact, a description of how to fix it is on the quality website. So yeah, and I do quite a cool fix in the video.
All right, well, with that, I'm going to go ahead and start the video up, that's presentation. If people have questions during the presentation, it's about 27 minutes long, put them in the question panel. Alister and I will be here at the end to answer questions and generally discuss this more. There'll be a lot of code. Alister will be showing off here. Klaus is asking about that, and lots of good stuff. So thanks a lot, everybody, and we'll see you on the flip side.
G'day, I'm Alister Christie from LearnDelphi.tv. I'm an Embarcadero MVP, developer, trainer, and most recently author. I've just finished a book on being more productive in the Delphi IDE called Code Faster in Delphi. If you're interested in Delphi productivity hacks, and you'll see some of them in this video, then you should purchase my book. In this video, we start by building the classic fish facts application and then go down a major rabbit hole. This video was incredibly hard to produce, so I hope you enjoy it. We'll start by creating a new Windows VCL application. To build our UI, we'll need to add some controls. So we'll start with a client dataset and a data source. And we'll just move those to the side. And we'll load a predefined dataset into our client dataset from the samples data folder. And we'll grab BioLife and we'll hook up the dataset property of the data source to the client dataset, and we'll add a DB grid, a DB memo, and a DB image. Let's select all those and set the data source property to be our data source 1, and we'll arrange our controls to make the GUI a little bit more friendly with the grid up the top and the image and memo below. Let's just set those field properties for the DB memo and the DB image. And let's just set the proportional property to true so that the fish fills the DB image appropriately. I'm also going to set some of these anchor properties so that the controls scale appropriately when we resize the form. And let's run our application and make sure everything is working correctly. It looks like everything scales as it should. And this fish image looks like it was from the 1990s. Well, because it is from the mid-1990s, it was one of the original sample databases available in the BDE. Let's remove some of these extra columns that we don't actually need. Let's bring up the fields editor for our client dataset, and we'll select these last 3 fields here and set their visible property to false, and that will hide them in the grid. Let's now save our project off, and we'll create a new folder for our application, and we'll call it fishfacts2 because I've already got a few set up already. And we'll call our main form main fish form, and we'll call our project fishfacts. Our fishfacts application is now basically built, but those images do look rather lame. So we should probably see if we can find some better images of fish. If only there was some website where we could go that has free images that we can use. Fortunately, there is. But first, let's just copy the species name to the clipboard. We can go to the Wikimedia Commons homepage and paste our species name in the search box. It looks like we have a spelling mistake, but that's okay. We still get a number of images. And if we click on one of those, and then we can right click and copy the image to the clipboard and go back to our FishFacts application and paste it in. That's saved our fish image to memory, but if we run the application again, we'll see that the old image is back. So we need to save our changes to disk. And to do that, we will take advantage of two events, the form create and form destroy. And we will also define a function to specify a file name. And we'll just rather lazily take the application name and change the file extension to .xml. We'll start by saving our changes by calling client dataset1.save to file and specifying our data file name. I'm also going to call the merge change log method on the client dataset, and this will merge all our changes. Otherwise, our XML file will contain the original data plus the changes. We also want to load our changes on form create, so we'll call the load from file method. We also want to make sure that that file actually exists before we do so. Let's run the application and see that we can save our changes. We'll change trigger fishy to trigger fish. I've obviously edited this data previously. So let's close and restart and see if that change has persisted, and it has. Let's go and check out that XML file. If we show an Explorer on our main form, we can then browse to the exe folder, and we see there is the XML file. We can now go back to thinking about how to update our images, and we could do the whole copy and paste thing for each image. That'll take forever, well, a few minutes, but anyway. But is there an API? And yes, it turns out there is. And we can take a look and see that there is actually a search function we can use, and it takes a bunch of parameters, and it's fairly straightforward. So let's have a look at that. And if we scroll right to the bottom of this page, we'll see that there is an example, and we'll click that, and we want to copy that first bit of the URL, and we want to write some code. Now, I'm not exactly sure what we're going to be doing, but we do want to download fish images, so we'll start by defining a procedure that does that. And we'll paste in that URL that we copied. And it just strikes me that we're going to be typing in this client dataset 1 a lot. So let's rename that. Now, normally I'd do that by right-clicking in the code and using the built-in refactoring, but it doesn't seem to be enabled in Delphi 10.4 sometimes. So we're going to have to do this old school. So I'm just going to rename the client dataset in the object inspector to fish, and then I'm just going to replace client dataset with fish everywhere where I'm using it. And we'll just compile that to verify that it works, and we're all good. We're going to need to download our URL once we've finished building it. So we're going to add a net HTTP client and HTTP request to our form. And we'll just hook up the client to the request. So let's update our URL, and we'll add the fish species name to the end of the search. But it can contain spaces. So what we'll do is we will replace these spaces with plus signs. Next, we'll actually want to download this URL. So we'll call the net HTTP client get function and pass in our URL. and it returns a response, which we'll want a variable for that. So we'll just add var to the beginning. And we want to get that response as text. So we'll have a response text variable, and we will call the content as string method. We want somewhere to place this response. So let's just adjust our form and make a bit of space. And we will add a memo control. And we'll just resize that to fit the space we want. And we'll adjust the anchors so that it stays on the right and resizes appropriately. And actually a button would be handy as well, so we can actually download our fish information. And we'll set its name, caption, and anchor properties. In the download fish image method, let's just add the response text to the memo. And in our button click, we'll call download fish image. So let's run that and see what we've got so far. If we click on our get fish button, we get a JSON response, which has some fields, including a URL. We can select that URL and copy it, and then paste it into a browser. And we see we get a search result. And if we go back to our JSON result, we see that it's an array with 4 items in it, the last of which is an array that contains our URL. So let's close that down and save our progress so far. We now have this JSON response that we want to extract the URL from. So does Delphi do JSON? Well, yes. And we'll need to start by adding system.json to our uses section. What we need to do next is parse our response text into a JSON object. And we'll create an object to store our JSON array. And we need to cast it as a tJSON array. If you recall the response from the web server, our JSON array contains 4 elements. We want to grab the last one, which is also a JSON array. So we're going to create a new array of URLs. And we're just going to grab the 3rd element of it and also cast that to a tJSON array. If our search failed, our URL array will be empty. So we want to just verify first off that the count is greater than 0. So we've got more than 1 item in the array. And if that's the case, we will just grab the first element in the array. And we want that element as a string, and we'll want a variable to store that in, which we'll call fish page URL. And of course, we'll need to declare that variable. And if our array is empty, let's initialize the string to being blank, which technically it will be anyway because strings are managed and get initialized. But it doesn't hurt to make these things explicit. So let's edit our URL into the memo. So let's run our application and see if what we've done so far is still correct. If I click the Get Fish button, we can take the URL and copy that to the clipboard, and then go to a browser and paste that in. And this is our search results for effectively the clown triggerfish. And if we look at the source for it and find the first JPEG, we will want to grab that image. So I'm just going to copy this part of the HTML to the clipboard. And I'm just going to paste this in here for now. We now want to download the fish page URL. So I'm just going to copy and paste this little bit of code and tidy it up. And rather than getting URL, we'll get fish page URL. And I think rather than just setting fish page URL to blank, I'll exit the procedure. And also I've noticed we can use value here just for a little bit more conciseness. We now have our web page as a string, and we can search within it for this bit of HTML and then grab the JPEG that appears after it. Searching within a string, that sounds like a job for regular expressions. So does Delphi do regular expressions? Well, you can probably already guess the answer to that one. We'll start by adding a bookmark and then going up and adding system.regularExpressions to our uses. And return to our bookmark. We're then going to search for a match by using the tRegex type and use the match function, and we're going to input our response text, which is our web page, and we're going to search for this content. We then want to match every character after it, and we will stop when we reach the end of the URL, so the quote / bracket. And if we fail to find a match, we will want to then exit. Let's extract our image URL from the matches variable, and we want to grab the first match, which happens to be 1 rather than 0. 0 is a special case. We want to grab the value, and then we'll write that to the memo. Let's run that and see if we get the correct URL for our image. And that's not meant to happen. Looks like I've done something wrong in my regular expression. And that should fix it. And let's try that again. And bingo, we have a URL for our fish image. We are now ready to download our fish image, and we will download it into a memory stream, and we'll use the net HTTP client to just do a get, and we'll get our image URL and we'll use the memory stream, and we'll just reset the position of the memory stream back to 0. And I'm just going to save the fish image to a folder I've already created on my hard drive in temp fish. And we'll just use the species name as the file name and add a .jpg on the end. And finally, we'll free our memory stream. And I've missed a bracket. So let's run that and see if we do indeed download a fish image. And there it is, our image of our clown triggerfish. Our next step is to save the fish into our database. So we'll start by calling edit, and we'll use a try except block. And if there's an exception, we'll just cancel our edit. And if we're successful, we'll just want to call post. On our fish graphic field, we will want to call the load from stream method and just pass in our memory stream. So let's try running that and see if our fish images get updated. And the answer is no, they don't. Now, this is because we are missing the JPEG unit from our uses. So we can just go ahead and add that and try again. So we'll click our Get Fish button again, and success. And we'll double check it for the other one. Perfect. And actually, we want to do that in that order. So we'll now go back to our Get Fish button. And we now just want to download every fish in our table. So we'll start with our first fish, and then we'll loop over all the fish in our table. And we'll download the image for each. And of course, we don't want to have an infinite loop, so we'll iterate to the next fish. And let's run our application and see what happens. And we see it's downloading quite happily until we get an exception of an unsupported graphic format. Now, to get around this, what we'll do is we will just remove the fish image temporarily and run again. But this time we will be able to get through the entire list of fish. And we'll paste back our fish image, and if we run again, we will see that we still get an exception on that third fish. So if we take a look at our third fish and go to File Explorer, we see that there is in fact a valid JPEG there for it. It's just there is a bug in Delphi that prevents it from loading. So if we have a look at the VCL imaging unit for JPEGs and come down to the class function can load from stream. To see what's going on, we need to load up a hex editor. And we'll load one of the JPEGs that works. We'll grab our clown triggerfish. Delphi determines whether the file's a JPEG or not by looking at the first 4 bytes. And if we have a look at these first 2, we see that they're reversed because Intel CPUs are little Indian. And it's these next 2 bytes that cause the problem. And to see that, we'll load up the image that doesn't work. We see that the FF characters are fine and match, but the next byte, the DB, doesn't match the E0 that Delphi is expecting. And we can compare the 2 files and see that they do in fact differ in that byte position. If we come down to the end of the file, we can see that under tpicture, we are registering the graphic format for tjpeg image and also unregistering it in the finalization. So we're going to make our own tgraphic, which is going to descend from tjpeg image. So we'll define a new class. And we need to shift our JPEG unit up to the interface section. And we'll just go back and hunt down that class method. So we'll just copy that and paste it into our improved JPEG and press Ctrl-Shift-C to implement it, and then we'll just go and copy the contents of the JPEG version. And we'll just make a minor alteration so that it recognizes the new JPEG format that Delphi doesn't support normally. This can load from stream function is called for each registered T graphic. So we are just saying that yes, we can load this format. To register our improved graphic with the T picture, we will just call the register from the form create. The file extension we don't care about, so we'll just put a random extension in there. We also don't really care about the description, so we'll just put something random in there as well. And of course, we want to register our improved JPEG. And again, let's run our application and we'll see if our images load correctly. And indeed, our problematic image is now working just fine. And if we set a breakpoint and navigate to our problematic image, we see that it stopped, and we can inspect and verify that everything is working as we expect. And let's shut our application down. So what a journey. We started out with our basic fish facts application. Then we decided to improve our images. So we consumed a REST API, extracted the data we wanted from the response using JSON and regular expressions. We downloaded the images for our fish and loaded them into our database, and finished with fixing a bug in the VCL, which of course I have reported. Thanks very much for watching this video. I hope you consider purchasing my book from learndelphi.tv/codefaster, or some of my other videos. I hope to see you in a future video. I'm Alister Christie.
Let's look at some questions here. So is the project, your source code available? Is that on your website, learndelphi.tv?
Yeah, no, it's actually not on the website, but let me throw, it's on Bitbucket. It's got a little bit of extra code in that one in the on scroll event, which is actually doesn't work all the time. So I was playing around with that a little bit earlier before the webinar, which is actually redundant. It was more for trying to find a solution, another solution to the JPEG issue.
Okay.
There's an interesting, the images in the fishfacts database are t-bitmaps, or bitmaps, but there's an 8-byte header in the t-graphic field, which is not part of the image, which took me a while to work out that. I did that in the my video for T-control list, which you can find on learndelphi.tv. It's where I use you do a fishfacts application using T-control list as a bit of experiment for it. So I've now done 3 videos on T-control list, and I'm pretty happy with it. I think a pretty good job was done with it. I've had a few minor glitches with it, but yeah, it's pretty good.
Yeah, I really like it too. I discovered a few things. Like I discovered that you can't actually put 4 billion items in it, which I reported as a bug, and they're like, "Well, we only said it supported millions." So I'm like, "Okay, fair enough."
So what's your use case for 4 billion items?
I didn't have a use case. I was just making a demo, and I was like, "Oh, let's show how many items you can put in here." And it's like, "Oh, it's it's an integer, so I'll put max int. I guess it was 2 billion. I put max int in, and it didn't work."
Okay, yeah.
So,
yeah, no, it's way better than DB control grid, which has so many quirks. But it makes it a challenge to use at times.
So you said that the bug that you showed was fixed, right?
Yes. It's, if you go to quality.embarcadero.com and search for number, in fact, I'll probably just paste it in the, and it's set as resolved. And I thought I'd forgotten that this was Delphi 10.4. I thought it was 10.3.3, but obviously it was fixed in one of the point releases.
Okay.
Which is good. And in terms of reporting bugs, it's definitely, if you come across them, it's definitely worthwhile reporting them, and make sure you have the steps to reproduce. And if you can provide a solution, that will, that'll always help a lot in getting it fixed.
Yeah, and if you can't provide a solution, make sure you provide as much as you can as far as making it reproducible. That goes a long way too.
Yeah, indeed. I think
and follow up with it as well, because I found a few times I have reported bugs, and then someone's like, it doesn't reproduce it following your steps, and I don't notice that. And then later I discovered it, and I'm like, oh, nope, it was something I did. It wasn't a bug.
Yeah, it can be. It's usually, if you're thinking it's a bug in your APIs and stuff like that, you're probably just initially using it wrong in some fashion. But yeah, very occasionally you do discover a bug in Delphi.
It happens. All software has bugs.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, the amount of source code in Delphi is insane. Once upon a time you could kind of be familiar with most of it.
Yeah.
But now it's just, it's phenomenally large, the size.
So now, did I ask you why you didn't use REST debugger in this when you were doing this? Was there a reason you didn't use REST debugger?
Yes.
Or is this?
I think, I mean, I probably could have, and probably should have outputted it into a data set or something. That would have been a good example. But the JSON that was returned is pretty short, so I didn't worry too much.
Yeah.
And
that's fine. I just was curious if there was a reason, because I use the REST debugger a lot, and I find it really useful. But there's been a couple times I've meant to use it with something, and I'm trying to think what they were, that it didn't work with a certain REST service or another. But generally speaking, I can do quite a bit of prototyping and testing with REST debugger.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't done a huge amount of stuff with REST APIs, but yeah, I've definitely used it a few times, and it's definitely very helpful in getting you started, and certainly creating the components initially, and can be highly helpful.
Yep. Okay, and actually, so Alister did mention his book, and I put a link in the chat for Code Faster in Delphi. Recommended the book, and I was just to discuss with Alister, and we'll hopefully discuss it some more. But the idea of doing a series of webinars where we share some of the tips from that and just general productivity tips with Delphi. So stay tuned for that. Hopefully, we'll let everybody know. Hopefully, it happens, but I would love to do that.
Yeah, it can just make a phenomenal difference in the speed at which you can write code. I mean, certainly, as developers, you can think a lot faster than you can type, even if you're able to do sort of 150 words a minute. If you're an insanely fast typist, it's still a struggle to keep up with thought.
That's true. The other thing is that it's amazing how often there are things I'm like, oh, I didn't know you could do that with Delphi, or I thought I knew the trick around this. It's like, oh no, there's another trick over here. I'm like, I didn't know that was there.
and if you don't use stuff regularly, you eventually forget it as well. So it's kind of odd that a lot of shortcuts and things I've in writing the book I've been reminded of, and of course there's a whole bunch that I was completely unaware of. And of course, there's a whole bunch of really obscure ones, which are the two key combination, Control Q, Control something or other, Control K type shortcuts. And there's some quite clever ones there. related to block selection that I keep meaning to practice and make sure I've internalized them. But yeah, the by the time you go away and look up the shortcut, it's much quicker to just have worked around it.
Well, it's one of those things. So we had a conversation earlier about automation and the key copying code today, and there is some investment required to automate something or to set up a process around something. But the eventual goal is that does pay off in reducing the time, right? And so in learning a keystroke, in learning a tip or technique to be more productive or whatever, there is the initial overhead of, okay, I got to look it up, right? Okay, I got to force myself to do the keystroke instead of the mouse movements the first few times, right? But then eventually knowing how to use the keyboard shortcuts and setting up those hotkeys and those macros and stuff like that pays off because you don't have, you're more productive in the long run. So
yeah, just doing some peer programming with people and watching someone go to the edit menu to select copy, just that kind of thing drives me insane.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just so and a lot of those keyboard shortcuts are mentioned in the menus. So if you can't remember them, go to the menu and then cancel your menu menuing and use the shortcut.
That's true. I would do that too.
Yeah, it's kind of probably the fastest way of learning those shortcuts anyway.
When I made there's a
print out lists as well and have them inside the computer.
Stephen Ball made a thing recently. Let me find it.
Oh, he has, yes. Yeah, he's got a nice looking list of shortcuts. And I've got there's quite a few pages in my book of keyboard shortcuts and a short description of each one. It's about 10 pages or something. And it's kind of interesting that a lot of my videos I've done promoting the book on keyboard shortcuts, and that's one entry in a table, for that out of the entire book. It's such a tiny thing. I mean, the things like if you get into doing metaprogramming, which is writing code to modify code,
yes,
you can do insane changes on applications that if you're doing manually would take months, and it might take a few days to work out how to modify DFM files and stuff like that. And I've got some examples in the book. But if you wanted to change, so you might be using the old MS sans serif font in everywhere in your application, and so you could do a simple text search and replace on all your files, or your DFM files. But if you also wanted to increase the point size by 1 or something like that, search and replace, you can no longer do that. You need to actually go in and modify the DFM file with knowledge of its structure and what have you. And I think Robert Love has got a DFM parser, which I've got a link to in the book. And it allows you to parse DFMs and make changes. I did it in quite a lot of it in modifying an application when porting it from the BDE, quite a large application, a few 100,000 lines of code. And I kind of, when I started that project, it wasn't really feasible to maintain both versions at the same time. So it couldn't really maintain the BDE version and the FireMonkey version. This wasn't enough time available to do that. So what I did was created a whole bunch of scripts and things to alter it, and so I'd run the scripts and see how the application worked, and if there was a problem, I'd either improve the script or modify the original code so that it worked with the script better. And eventually, I could have just run the script on the BDE application, and the output ran fine.
So I was going to Yeah, I was going to ask how you're doing. So you're doing it as text parsing then?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's two levels. There's modifying the DFM files, which and modifying the source code. So that for the source code, you can use the Delphi AST abstract syntax tree, which is on GitHub, I think. And that's pretty powerful. I've used that a number of times to modify Delphi code. In the example in the book, I just parse the uses in a project to produce a little graph showing the dependencies between various units. And it's a really, really short application, and it outputs to a file format that is used, I think it was a Giphy or something like that. So it produces a text file, which is a graph, and then that's rendered in a third-party application.
Okay. I had looked at long ago. I did it was like Delphi 5 or Delphi 6. I made a component that when you dropped it on the form would actually go look at the parent component, which is the form, and then find all the other components in the form, and then would make changes to it. So that, because we had this big, huge migration we had to do, we had all this components spread all over the place. And so you just drop it on the form, and then it actually removed itself when it was done and make the changes to it. But I was actually thinking you could do quite a bit where what I would love to do is make like some sort of script thing that you could type a script that could go through and make changes to all your components and stuff like that, using, because there's a lot of great functionality available through that with the
open tools or
RTTI open tools. Yeah. RTTI open tools.
Yeah. So there's in GExperts, and I think there's a similar thing in CNPAC. There's a component replacer. Which allows you to change components and change the properties, swap properties around, and they have a little bit of logic. So you can say, if the font size is blah, then do something else or whatever. So it allows you to script to a certain extent, changing components. And I've not used it in a project so far, but I think that's quite handy. It's quite a handy tool for if you're migrating from using the standard Delphi to using, I don't know, the raise controls or Dev Express or something like that. You could replace all the components and make other changes to them in the process.
There is there's the refined utility that we ship as well. It was designed specifically for migrating from BDE to FireDAC. And there's also Delphi Parser is another tool that does a lot of the similar sort of stuff as well.
Yes, yeah, refined is definitely worth learning about, and I've got some examples in my book on using it. And you can do it for kind of silly things as well. There's one of the examples I have is that if you use message dialog in your VCL application, if you don't have, I think it's system.ui types in your uses, you get a warning saying not inline because it's not in the uses. So you can write a script that replaces message dialog with message dialog, and also adds, and part of that you can add units to your uses clauses, and so you can add the system.ui types in automatically, so you don't have to go through manually change all your units if you want to get rid of. I mean, I quite like minimizing the number of warnings I have, so it's a clever way of doing that. There are a few other things that have changed in recent versions of Delphi where inlining doesn't work if you're missing certain units.
Oh, that's cool. That's a good solution, because I'm the same way. I like to make sure that if I'm not going to fix a warning or hint, I usually put a tag to turn off in that one spot where it's on the check. That's the kind of
I mean, it's pretty hard if you've got 300 warnings. If one more pops up, it's kind of hard to spot. and you get used to not looking at the warnings as well if there's lots of them. So definitely, and I think this is a point I make in my next book, which I've yet to finish, Code Better in Delphi.
There was a question about that, so
yeah, indeed. I've been busy lately on various non-programming projects, so I've not had a lot of computer time lately. And so, but I really just focus a bit more on getting various things done. Some training videos, new training videos coming out, and what have you. So stay tuned for that.
Cool. There's a question here from David I actually about how will you plan on updating your book and your videos when new versions of Delphi comes out with new fixes and features and such?
Yeah, so that's an interesting thing. The importance of backups. I wrote the book originally in Google Docs, and that allows for lots of people to contribute quite easily. You can just share that, and people can go through and make suggestions. And actually, and that I don't know, about a dozen people help with editing the book, and that improved it immensely. I've got to send out copies to various people, signed copies, but a digression. But so I saved it and started editing in OpenOffice, but unfortunately I had not saved it to my sort of main drive, which gets backed up every night, but instead to a sort of scratch drive for some reason. I can't remember what, and that drive died. And so I lost the final editing, mostly just formatting. So it's not a big deal, but it's still probably a couple of days work to get back to the original text or the new text. So I mean, I've got PDF versions and that kind of stuff. So I
was going to say, you might be able to find an editor that you could give what you have in the PDF and say, make these match.
yeah, indeed. Yeah. So, I mean, most of the changes are formatting, and I think I'm going to try and keep it in Google Docs because it just makes it so much easier for collaboration. And so, in terms of keeping it up to date, that I would like to do that to a certain extent, because I probably want to have a second edition and things like that. And certainly I'm using LeanPub for the ebook application. If you're, I can certainly give plenty of tips for getting a book published. And so using LeanPub, they basically allow you to update it however many times you want. And so I'll probably keep the PDF version up to date. I did EPUB and Mobi versions, but the EPUB format is a bit of a nightmare actually, because it's basically a zipped up HTML and CSS and various other bits and pieces of fonts and things like that. But each reader seems to interpret stuff slightly differently, and they'll do optimizations like using their own fonts and things like that. And so for like just a plain, if you're writing a novel, that would be fine. But wanting source code with syntax highlighting and in a proportional font and things like that, I just had a nightmare getting it to work with all these EPUB readers. So I probably did, and most people seem to have downloaded the PDF anyway. So I think I'll stick with just doing the PDF.
Yeah, I think personally, I like the PDF for programming books where the page layout is very specific, because you're right, the EPUB page layouts, where something page layout is important, like for code blocks and stuff. I
mean, it's handy if you want to read on a phone or something like that.
Yeah.
But and certainly I've used the like Mobi editions and put them on Kindle, because then that synchronizes with all, I might read it a bit on my phone, a bit on a tablet, and a bit on the actual Kindle device. And so that's quite handy. But yeah, certainly PDF, and I did make quite a nice job of laying out the book, and put page numbers in binary and had little logos around the page numbers and things like that. And I think for the next book, there's some. I might include some numbers. I came across. I was watching a video on YouTube, Numberphile, I think, and they had a numbering system from I think it was basically a dead language, and it was quite. I thought that would be interesting to write a Delphi application to generate those numbers. Yeah,
I want to do that too.
That'd be cool to have page numbers in that format.
Hey, let's do we should schedule and do it together. If you're up for that, I would love to do that and just do some remote paired programming to do that, because I had that same thought and I just haven't gotten around to getting it done. Because
that's an interesting idea. I am very reluctant. I like to, practice. If I'm producing a video, I'll practice it a couple of times beforehand, or if I'm, familiar enough with it, I might still do it first time off. But it's kind of, you kind of think it's kind of a little embarrassing sometimes. Because I often write appallingly bad code initially, just patching things together.
I think we all do. It's okay.
Yeah. So, but I think I just need to get over that. I mean, it's. I think that sort of thing is really helpful to people starting out, just to see how the sort of experimentation process to go through to get things working. Generally, I'll start out with terrible code and then just start refactoring it until it is clean, or as clean as it needs to be. Because sometimes maybe you're writing stuff that's only going to be used once, and so you don't really care if how bad it is. But often,
yeah, exactly. Well, that's where the whole thing about refactoring and legacy code, right? Legacy code's code you had to read after you wrote it. It's code you're maintaining, and that's good. That's a good sign. That means you did it right. But
and there's a lot. I mean, I've worked on most of the things I've been employed on using Delphi has been on these huge legacy applications. Hundreds of thousands of lines of code. And the thing is that they work. Delphi has enabled them to just continue maintaining that easily. If they'd written it in probably just about any other language, they probably would have had to have rewritten it 3 times over.
But
it just makes, from a cost of ownership point of view, Delphi is so cheap over historically. The amount of code reuse you can take advantage of. But I'm digressing. The point I was going to make is, a lot of this, one-off code that you might be writing might be in production for the next 20 years. So sometimes it does pay to not write too badly. Uncle Bob, Robert C. Martin, says one of his mantras: if you want to go fast, go well.
Yes.
So write your code good to begin with. I really, one of the things I want to do is get into proper test-driven development, and I've done it on a few small projects, but not in anything large. And I tend to work with legacy code anyway, which doesn't lend itself to getting tests written for it. It's only when you're writing some sort of new thing, validating credit card numbers or something simple like that you can actually sort of isolate that and write test for it.
Well, there's a lot that you can do around refactoring to make your code more decoupled, because that's usually the problem, is that your code wasn't written in a decoupled way to begin with. That makes it hard to test. But
legacy code. Yeah, that tends to be the thing that makes legacy code hard to maintain, is the coupling.
Yep, exactly. So that's part of paying down that technical debt. But we do need to wrap up. It's past top of the hour. I know we had a little technical difficulties at the beginning. Thank you so much, Alister. There's a lot of positive comments in here from people, including Kevin Bond, who's MVP educator, written a number of books as well, saying he loves your videos. So I would agree. You do great stuff. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I might make this video, do a little bit of a deep stack video at some point. We could do a webinar on it. It's really quite amazingly cool how it works. I think I've been kind of reluctant to get into the AI space because I thought, it's really complicated and all that kind of stuff. But after playing with DeepStack, it's like, this was trivial. This vision, detecting objects and people and stuff like that, and you can do face recognition and all sorts of things with it as well, which I haven't looked at yet. But yeah, I can provide a photo and it can say, that's a cow and that's a dog and it's a person. It's quite amazing, and I came across it because I was using Blue Iris for my security system, and that had a DeepStack integration. And so rather than it sensing on motion, it'll sense on the motion and then provide an image to DeepStack, and DeepStack will do the image recognition on that, and then it can provide an alert saying, there's a person in this clip. But anyway, I'm digressing again.
Well,
so I hope everyone's enjoyed
the
webinar and our sort of tangential talk afterwards.
All right. Well, thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to talking to you and connecting with you on some more stuff in the future. So.
Okay. Yeah, I look forward to it as well.
All right. Take care, and thank you everybody for joining us. Talk to you later. Bye.
Yeah.